Thank you, Madam President, Sir John Daniel, honorable delegates, and friends. I am honored to have the chance to address you about the part of open educational resources that relates to the question of licensing. But let me introduce this subject in this way. This is David Slater, a world-famous photographer of wildlife. He was in Indonesia shooting some macaw monkeys, and he left his camera on the table. And one of the monkeys picked it up and took a self-portrait. And the news agency that had hired Slater then attached a copyright sign to that portrait and started selling it across the world. And TechDirt, an extraordinary online resource for critical thinking about copyright, raised the obvious question: could an animal get copyright? And even if it could it assign that copyright to a news agency? Well, once TechDirt published this article, including the photographs to illuminate the points, the agency filed a legal action against TechDirt, alleging it was illegal for them to talk about and display these photographs, asking the question whether the copyright permitted them to license this work. It turns out monkeys don't do fair use. Here's another story. Some of you might have heard of what we call literal videos in the remix community. Literal videos are remixes that take videos and substitute, dub different words for the original videos. It's inspired originally by this artist,
it's a microphone.
So Das Jr. was inspired by this form of expression. He decided he wanted to do his own literal video of the extraordinarily famous music video Total Eclipse of the Heart. I wanted to show it to you, but I tried to download it here in Europe, and I found this. It's been blocked by Sony Music because of an alleged violation of Sony's copyright, at least outside of the United States, where fair use does not protect this commentary on an underlying creative work. It is blocked by Sony and YouTube. Outside of the United States, however, you can get this remix of the original video. It's framed with a cat so that the original video isn't caught by YouTube's ID checker. So you could say you're better off because you got the cat and the rest of us in America just got the original video. Or here's a third example. I was invited to speak at TED about these issues of copyright. It's a little embarrassing. I was extremely
I want to talk to you a little bit
time,
about user-generated content. I'm going to tell you 3 stories on the way to one argument that's going to tell you a little bit about how we open user-generated content up for business.
Now, to my great surprise, this video has been seen by hundreds of thousands of people.
1906, this man, John Philip Sousa, traveled to this place, the United States.
GEMA has blocked access to this video because in the course of explaining the issues of copyright, I use copyrighted material, and of course, I don't have a bevy of lawyers who have cleared the copyright permissions for me to comment on copyrighted materials. Blocked in Germany, but fortunately not in the rest of the world. Now, these 3 stories are in a certain sense loony. They are the kind of crazy talk that is how we like to talk about what's sometimes referred to as the war, or the copyright wars, or as my friend, the late Jack Valenti, former president of the Motion Picture Association of America, used to call his own, quote, terrorist war, where apparently the terrorists in this war are our children. We, by which I mean from the copyleft community, they, from the copyright community, we like to talk like this to make this war seem nuts. Now, as a representative of the copyleft community, let me confess, this way of talking is more than a little juvenile. Juvenile. Because if you rise above the din of these various disputes about copyright, both sides, the copyleft and the copyright, acknowledge that copyright here is essential. For certain creative works, for the filmmaker, the musician, the novelist, the computer programmer, copyright is essential. And rather than the juvenile, a perspective of maturity would say we should respect the struggle of these artists to protect their creative work and earn the return they need to create in a new digital environment. For them, copyright is essential. For its purpose, for copyright's purpose, to protect authors, to inspire creativity, to give them the independence they need so that they're not just patrons of some rich entity that controls what kind of creativity they produce. Where copyright is essential, this respect is appropriate. Okay, but there's also a battle in a field where copyright is not essential. At least for copyright's purpose, to give authors what they are creating for, to inspire the creativity that authors are producing, to give them the independence. This battle is a context where copyright is not essential. Let me give you an obvious example, the field of science. I was thumbing through my Harvard Gazette, and I came across this article about a new economics professor at Harvard, Geeta Gopinath. And the author of the article obviously ran out of questions because at a certain point he asked her why there were no books on her shelves. And Geeta's response was, "Everything I need is on the internet now." What exactly does that mean? Everything I need is on the internet now. Well, I wanted to explore that. So I've been studying this question of corruption of the United States Congress. I went to Google Scholar on a computer that was not attached to the Harvard network. And I searched on the top articles about campaign finance. And these are the top 10 articles about campaign finance in Google Scholar. And then I went through these articles to see what I could get access to. So the first article I could get access to if I paid $29.95. The second article was protected by JSTOR, terms not revealed. The third article, $29.95. The fourth article was free so long as I signed up for a $99.95 option for the whole year. The fifth article, again protected by JSTOR. The sixth article, JSTOR was offering it for $10. The seventh article, protected by JSTOR. Eighth article, protected by JSTOR. Ninth article, protected by JSTOR. 10th article, $29.95. So how accessible are these the most important articles about campaign finance on the internet now? Well, one of them is free, one time only. One of them's $10. Three of them $29.95. 5 terms unknown. So what does Geeta Gopinath mean when she says everything is on the internet now? She means if, and this is a big if, you are a tenured professor at an elite university, or maybe just a professor, or maybe students and professors at an elite university, or maybe it's students and professors at any US university. If you are one of these people, the knowledge elites, then you have free access. The rest of the world, not so much. Now this craziness doesn't stop here. When my third child was born, my second, I hope, will stay focused on his iPad, but my third child was born, we were fearful that she had jaundice. And when the doctor said she had jaundice, I did what any academic would do. I went to the internet and I gathered every single article I could about jaundice so I would know everything there was to know if in fact it turns out she had jaundice. I also did a calculations. If I had not been a Harvard professor to gather the 10 articles I collected, it would have been $435. But fortunately, I'm a Harvard professor. I got it all for free. Well, on the third day, she fell into a stupor. The doctor told me to rush her to the hospital. And so at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting next to her in the emergency room. She is asleep. and I need something to do. So I take out the pile of articles I've printed out about jaundice, and I take the first article published in this great journal, American Family Physician, which is perhaps the most authoritative article for not specialists, but ordinary people trying to understand this disease. And I'm flipping through the article, getting to the critical chart that will tell me whether my daughter has a life-threatening condition from this disease of jaundice. And I turn the page and I get to table 4, and I'm instructed, the rights holder did not grant rights to reproduce this item in electronic media. For the missing item, see the original print version of this publication. And I was astonished and liberated for one moment, no longer to think about the life-threatening condition my daughter might have, instead thinking about the culture-threatening condition that we have produced for the internet, where now we are regulating access down to parts of articles, using technology to block even fractions of articles here and throughout. This is the architecture for access, quote, unquote, access that we are building, even in Google Books, perfect control down to the sentence. I always forget to say this. I should say this. She was fine. She didn't have jaundice. Everything was okay. Now, my point is we should give this emerging reality a name. Looney doesn't quite catch it, because for the copyright purpose of these authors, for the purpose of inspiring their creativity, for the purpose of assuring them their independence, this system is outrageous. This is the sense of outrageous I want you to have here. This sense of outrageous, because we built this world. We academics built this world. It flows from the choices that we make about copyright. But here, the copyright choices that we are making is not to enable authors to do something they otherwise couldn't do, like musicians who couldn't create unless they got money from their work, or filmmakers who couldn't make films unless they could recoup the investment from their filmmaking. There is not one of these authors who gets money from copyright. Not one of them who wants the distribution of their article limited. Not one of them who has a business model that focuses on restriction of access to their work. Not one of them should support this system. Every single one should oppose it, for it defeats copyright's purpose to give authors the opportunity to create as they want to create, to inspire creativity, to give them the independence they need. It defeats their purpose to restrict access to their work in this way. Now, when you see that, it also helps us to see what I think we should recognize as a difference between different kinds of authors. There are authors who depend upon control to their work in order to give them the incentives they need, authors like musicians. But then there are authors who are privileged authors, like scientists, like me, who don't depend upon restricting access to their work in order to earn the money we need to live. We get paid in other ways. These privileged authors, like scientists, have a model for access that's different from the unprivileged authors like musicians or novelists. And what they increasingly are recognizing is that this privilege carries an obligation. The privilege has an obligation. The obligation is to enable access to their work and to restrict the unnecessary control that is being automatically built into the systems that otherwise would be giving the world access to scientific knowledge without any unnecessary restriction. Now, to do this well, we have to focus on the tools that have to be built to make this kind of free access possible. Some of those tools are conceptual. People have to begin to think about the difference between what regular authors and what privileged authors need. But some of these tools are practical. Ways to say, to simply assert, here is something, take this, it is free. And that was the idea that inspired us exactly a decade ago to begin to build the project that's called the Creative Commons Project. We wanted a simple way for authors and artists to mark their content with the freedoms they intended it to carry. So that instead of the standard all rights reserved, we could have a some rights reserved model. Some rights reserved to the authors, others given over to the public, so people at least have the freedom to copy and share the work freely. That was the objective of Creative Commons. And when you go to our site or to any of the other institutions that have implemented our technology, you're given simple choices. Do you want to allow commercial use of your work? Do you want to allow modifications of your work? And if you allow modifications, do you want to require that other people release their work in the same free way that they have gotten access to your work? Share and share alike. Once you make those choices, subject to whatever jurisdiction that you are subject to, you're given a license. The license comes in 3 separate layers. One layer is a human-readable commons deed, designed to be understood by anybody in language specific to the particular jurisdiction. It's a human expression of the freedoms that run with this content. Second, and very different, is a lawyer-readable license, a billion-page document written by some of the best lawyers that we can find all across the world to make enforceable the freedoms that run with this content. And third is a machine-readable expression of the freedoms that run with this content, so that search engines can gather content on the basis of the freedoms that are said to inhere in the content and not necessarily just the restrictions. Now, in the 10 years since we've launched this project, we have now more than 100 affiliated projects around the world that are in the process of porting or have already ported our licenses to their local jurisdictions. Every one of the green countries here is part of this family. Every one of the red countries is our next target. And as we have spread this technology, the number of adoptions of these licenses has literally gone through my slides roof here, right? There are more than 500 million objects now licensed under Creative Commons licenses on the internet, making it accessible and valuable for people freely, subject to the terms the licenses say. So the White House has used our licenses, Public Library of Science has used our licenses, Al Jazeera has an extraordinary archive of raw footage from the Palestinian conflict which uses our licenses. YouTube has now enabled uploaders to use our licenses to mark their work. Flickr has their licenses built in from the very beginning so that you can reserve your rights for commercial purposes and license them off to groups like Getty Images, but release for non-commercial purposes to anybody. And Wikipedia has recently embraced our licenses so that all of the Wikipedia content is protected by a Creative Commons license. And TED uses Creative Commons to guarantee all of its work is accessible internationally for free. This is the objective of Creative Commons, tools. And these were the first step of the tools necessary to enable the kind of freedom that at least the privileged authors need. But we need more steps now. First, we need to standardize across the world this infrastructure of freedom so that it's simple and reliable for people to know what they can do and what they can't. And to make this freedom interoperable, so that if it's not one license that's being used, if it's not just the Creative Commons licenses, at least all of these free licenses abide by a critical principle. The principle is that freely licensed content must be interoperable. If it's licensed under a Creative Commons license, it needs to be interoperable, usable with content licensed under some other free licensing organization's licenses. These licenses need to be platforms of freedom, not islands of freedom. Interoperable, in the following example, shows this well. Wikipedia, when it first was born before Creative Commons, so it had to use the Free Software Foundation's GNU FDL, Free Document License. The Free Document License is a copyleft share-alike license, exactly like our copyleft share-alike by SA license. But both of these licenses originally said the only content that you can mix with content licensed by our license is content that has also been licensed by our license. So that meant you couldn't take Creative Commons content and put it in Wikipedia, and you couldn't take Wikipedia content and put it in a Creative Commons project. Well, took longer than it should, but after a number of years of negotiating and talking about the principles we all believed in, we found a way to obliterate these differences so that now all the content is licensed under both of these licenses, making it perfectly interoperable whenever you want to make use of this Wikipedia content. And institutions must insist and support this principle of compatibility, this federation of interoperable license. That's number two. Number three is that we need to make it simpler for everybody, and students in particular, to do right, meaning to respect the rights that copyright gives. We need to build an infrastructure of free better, to make it easier and more obvious for people to know how to do what is right and respect the rights without uncertainty and without forcing them into violating other people's rights. And here I think a very fundamental question is why these commercial entities like Microsoft and Google are not doing more to help make it easy for people to do what is right. So for example, if you use Google's image search, and Microsoft is exactly the same, it is astonishing the images that they can gather on any subject across the internet. And even more astonishing to see that you can then select across these different dimensions, the size, the type, the color, the hue, the standard view, whatever, all of these different dimensions, they give you the power to filter these images on. But why don't they give you the power to filter them on the freedom, the licensed freedom to reuse the images? So that when a student does a report that gathers images that say some historical figure has inspired, we can give the students an easy way to say, these are the images you should be using, and you shouldn't be violating other people's copyrights by using those images there. These are the kind of tools that the 21st century creators need who want to be respectful of the rights of others. These are the tools that we have and will need, that the privileged will need, especially if they're going to live up to their ethical obligation to create in a way that others can take and build upon from them. Okay, now, OER has a special place in this battle. It stands, in my view, between the ordinary authors and the privileged authors. Because some in the OER movement are themselves privileged. They create, but their salary is paid by other people. They don't need to control the copyright of what they create in order to create. They want to create and give their work to others. But some in the open education resources movement are not privileged in this way. Their whole livelihood is about creating material that others have to buy, and if they don't buy this material, they can't produce the material in a way that is profitable for their entities. I think that this mixed environment presents an opportunity for us. And it's an opportunity that's not just for the open education resources movement. It's an opportunity instead for a certain kind of peace in the copyright wars generally. In this context, the objective is not to lecture people about what they should do. In this context, it's about enabling a choice by creators, giving them simple ways to say free if that's what they mean, and to support and to enable the ability of more people to say free if that's what they mean. In this context, it's not helpful to wage a war, but to recognize the different purposes of the different entities that will be working together to build the OER movement, to respect these differences, to encourage these differences, to find ways to enable each of them to flourish. Because the balance that this would encourage has its own consequences. We discovered this in the Creative Commons context. We discovered Creative Commons was helping to build understanding of copyright generally. When we launched Creative Commons in China, China Daily ran a front page article about the project. And the article described the movement and what it was about. But in the course of the article, the author asserted that Creative Commons, because it was more balanced, was going to encourage more respect among the Chinese people for copyright. because a balanced demand by the author is more likely to be met by respect and compliance by the consumer than what is perceived to be an extreme demand, that people in China pay $25 for a CD pressed by Sony. And because you build this balance, you can build alliances that otherwise would have seemed impossible. So this is one of my favorite stories. There's a fantastic photographer, Claudia Montano, who took this photograph in Colombia and posted it up on Flickr under rights that gave people freedom to share it as long as they didn't do it for commercial purposes. This was the CC-empowered infrastructure of Flickr. Alpai then took the picture and published it on the front page of their newspaper without permission, without talking to Maria at all. And then ensued a riot on the internet as people were furious about the fact that this commercial publisher had taken this CC licensed work and used it without the permission of the original author. Or Alan Senquist had a similar story. He took this fantastic picture of this 76 sign, posted it on Flickr under terms that didn't permit commercial use, and then AutoWeek took it and published it without asking permission of him at all. And once again, there was a riot in the community of CC activists who all of a sudden became copyright activists, as they were increasingly defending the artist's rights here against what they called, quote, piracy, and discovering something in themselves, these CC copyleft activists, that sometimes they believed in copyright and believed in the need to assert copyright to protect the original author's purpose. My view is that this recognition that balance produces will make the war talk that we've inherited for the last 10 years crazy talk. That this balance will battle the extremisms that exist in the copyright debate today. Copyright extremism, which I think all of us need to find a way to resist. We need to resist the extremes because the extremism begets extremism. The one side that says perfect control over every single use, including articles that would talk about our work, just begets another side, which is abolitionism. The growing movement, especially among young people who believe copyright is useless and unnecessary and we should simply eliminate it as one of the bits of infrastructure within our legal collection. I am against abolitionism. I think copyright is essential. I am also against a system of perfect control. In this sense, I feel more like Gorbachev than like Yeltsin, kind of an old communist, just trying to update the system to make it make sense in the 21st century. I want to preserve copyright against these extremes. Now, of course, OER should push for OER reasons, for the extraordinary opportunity of education and empowerment and efficiency that having resources available licensed freely would empower all across the world. But I also think we should be pushing for OER because of a certain kind of policy sanity it might begin to inspire. I can report that our politics in the United States won't push for that sanity. Our own kind of corruption in the United States will block that kind of sanity because that corruption feeds on the extremes. And what we need are teachers, education, open education, resources to help teach us something different. Thank you very much.